The city was burning. He was bleeding out. She had stabbed him once, then again, and left him to die in the fire. But when the flames closed in, and the screams got louder, he went back for her anyway now. They run together through the ruins. She's hiding something, something that will make him wish he had left her behind. The flames were everywhere, and he was bleeding out. She had stabbed him once, then again, and left him to die in the fire. But in the next hour, they would fight side by side against something older than war itself. They would face the machines that burn entire worlds, the shadows that hunt both human and alien, and a truth that could turn them into enemies again. But first, he had to survive her. The city was burning, so was the sky. Captain Mark Rains pushed through the chaos, the heat biting his face, the smell of ash filling his lungs. All around him, buildings collapsed like dying giants. Sparks rained from the heavens. Somewhere behind the roaring fire, explosions boomed sharp, deep, and endless. He moved through the wreckage with his rifle low, eyes scanning for survivors. Every second mattered. Every step could be his last. Then, movement in the shadows, he froze, his instincts screaming. A figure stepped forward. Graceful, her skin glowing blue against the firelight, her long, hot pink hair catching the light like burning silk. Her eyes locked on him with pure hate. He didn't know her name, but her gaze said enough. Before he could speak, before he could even raise, his weapon sheath closed the distance in a blur. The blade slid into his side. The pain was a sudden, white-hot spike that stole his breath. He staggered back, his voice caught in his throat. She didn't stop. The second strike came harder, deeper, twisting the blade inside him as if she wanted to carve him from the inside out. Mark dropped to one knee, strength leaking away as fast as his blood. She leaned in close, so close he could smell the smoke in her hair. She whispered something in her own language, words he didn't understand, but the tone was final, and she pulled the blade free and was gone, disappearing into the fire like a ghost. For a moment, all he heard was the crackle of flames and the pounding of his own heart. Mark pressed a hand to his wound, feeling the hot slickness between his fingers. His body wanted to give in, to collapse into the ash, and let the fire take him. But then he heard it. A cry, high-pitched, faint, and terrified, a child's cry. His head snapped up. The sound was distant but clear, cutting through the chaos. Someone was still alive. The pain in his side didn't matter anymore. He forced himself upright, swaying but steadying. His breath came ragged, but his legs moved. Every step was fire in his muscles, every heartbeat a thunderclap in his ears. He turned toward the sound, weaving through a maze of collapsed walls and shattered glass. The closer he got, the hotter it became. The air shimmered in waves. His armor was heating up against his skin. Then he saw her again, the blue-skinned woman. She stood in the center of what was once a home, its walls now broken in bleeding smoke. In her arms was the child, small, wrapped in some kind of silver fabric, its wide alien eyes wet with tears. She held it close, protective. Her weapon was still in her other hand. It's the same weapon she had just used to stab him. She saw him, and her eyes hardened instantly. "Leave us," she hissed, in accented but clear English. The ground shuddered beneath them, dust falling from above. Somewhere nearby, something exploded, shaking the structure around them. The fire crept closer, licking at the walls, turning the air into a furnace. "You have to get out," Mark said, voice rough. She didn't move. The child whimpered against her shoulder. She adjusted her stance, not stepping back, not lowering the blade. The fire was seconds away from cutting off every exit. Mark's cum crackled in his ear. "Rains, this is command. Retreat now. You're in the kill zone. Get out." He ignored it. He looked at the woman, at the child, at the jagged weapon aimed at his chest. He could still feel his own blood running down his side, warm and sticky. She had already tried to kill him twice. Saving her would be insane. But the look in her eyes wasn't hate anymore. It was fear, not of him, of something else. The sound came then a deep, vibrating hum, like metal grinding under immense pressure. The woman flinched at the noise. Mark didn't know what it was, but it was getting closer. He took a step toward her. She tensed, her grip tightening on the weapon. The hum grew louder. The fire roared higher. The building groaned, timbers splitting. Above their heads, "We're out of time," Mark said. The ceiling gave way. Instinct took over. He lunged forward, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward the side corridor. She fought him, slamming her fists into his armor, shouting words he couldn't understand. But he didn't let go. The air in the corridor was a tunnel of smoke and heat. The fire raced after them like a living thing, hissing, clawing, hungry. Debris fell, smashing into the floor and walls. Mark shielded them both, his body taking the burns. They broke through a collapsed archway and out into the open night. It could be called might. The sky was a sea of fire and smoke. Mark released her, panting, every muscle in his body shaking. She stared at him, chest heaving, the child still clutched in her arms. Her blade was gone, lost somewhere in the chaos. The hum was still there, louder now. Mark turned toward the sound, through the smoke. Something moved, something huge. Mark's grip on his rifle tightened as the shape in the smoke drew closer, its heavy steps sending tremors through the ground. The blue-skinned woman's eyes darted toward the movement, her body stiff with fear, but she still kept herself between him and the small alien child she clutched. The fire's glow lit her features, revealing streaks of ash across her face, and for the first time, Mark noticed her arms trembling not from weakness, but from the effort of holding her ground. "What is it?" he demanded, his voice low, but she didn't answer. The hum in the air deepened, turning into a metallic growl. And then a silhouette emerged, a towering machine with spider-like legs, its body bristling with weapons that glinted in the firelight. Mark felt his stomach drop.
Oh.
This was no human. Tech. The machine scanned the ruins with sweeping beams of cold blue light, pausing whenever it found movement. He pressed his back against a broken wall, motioning for her to stay quiet, but she didn't obey. Instead, she whispered something to the child and shifted her position, still blocking him from view, as though she feared the machine might see him before it saw her. The ground shook again, closer this time, and the machine's head swiveled toward them. Mark could hear the sharp hiss of steam vents opening, the sound of energy charging within its core. They had seconds, maybe less, before it fired. He knew he could run and maybe survive, but his eyes went to the child, and for reasons he didn't want to think about, he stayed. "We move now," he hissed, grabbing her arm, but she resisted, glaring at him with the same burning defiance she had when she stabbed him. The machine's blue beam swept past the wall, bathing them in its cold light for a heartbeat before sliding away. His pulse hammered. If it came back, they would be nothing but ash. "I'm not dying here because you're stubborn," Mark growled, yanking her toward a narrow alley between two collapsed buildings. She fought him the whole way, her voice sharp and fast in her own language, but he ignored it, forcing them into the shadows just as the machine unleashed a searing blast into the spot they had been standing. The explosion rattled the alley walls, showering them in dust and debris. The child wailed softly, and for the first time, Mark saw something different in her expression: hesitation. Not trust, not yet, but maybe. The beginning of it. "You want." I can now push straight into part 3, so the danger escalates and there's no drop in tension. That's key to keeping audience retention across the whole video. "Do you want me to keep going?" You said :3, ChatGPT said. "Got it. Here's part 3 in one continuous paragraph. Same third-person style, simple English, keeping the suspense high." They crouched in the darkness of the alley, the heat from the blast still crawling across their skin, the smell of scorched stone heavy in the air. Mark pressed a hand to his side, feeling the warm pulse of blood under his fingers, but he refused to slow down. The woman clutched the child tighter, her eyes flicking to the edges of the alley as if expecting more machines to appear at any moment. Scum crackled again, the sharp voice of his commander cutting through the static. "Rains, you're out of position. Repeat, retreat to evac now. You have no backup." But Mark's gaze stayed locked on the street ahead, where The hum of the machine faded into the distance. Not leaving, he muttered under his breath and cut the cum entirely. The woman seemed to notice, tilting her head as if curious why he would disobey his own people. He wasn't about to explain, not with the air trembling from another distant blast. They needed to move, and fast. He stepped out first, scanning the street, every shadow a potential threat. She followed reluctantly, her free hand hovering near where her weapon used to be. They wove through the rubble, weaving between skeletal remains of buildings and piles of twisted metal, until Mark spotted what looked like a partially intact sky bridge ahead. It could offer a way above the fire zones and into the safer ruins. "Up there," he said, pointing, but she froze, her grip on the child tightening like a vice. "No," she whispered, her voice low but sharp. Mark's jaw clenched. Every second they argued was a second closer to being found. "Do you want to live or not?" he snapped, and without waiting for her answer, he pushed forward. A sudden screech echoed through the city, not mechanical this time, but alive, layered with a sound that clawed at the inside of his skull. He stopped dead. The woman's face went pale, and even the child buried its head against her neck. Whatever made that sound, it was hunting. And it was close. The screech came again, sharper this time, echoing off the ruined walls, until it seemed to come from every direction at once, making Mark's skin crawl. He raised his rifle, scanning the shadows, his breathing slow but heavy, every muscle in his body ready to fire or run. The woman's steps faltered, her eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. And for the first time since he had seen her, her defiance slip-tripped by pure fear. "What is it?" he asked, but she only shook her head quickly, whispering something to the child that made its tiny fingers clutch the fabric of her armor. A flicker of movement appeared on the far side of the street, too fast to focus on, followed by a soft clicking sound, like metal teeth snapping shut. Mark backed them toward the sky bridge entrance, keeping his rifle aimed at the shifting shadows. The air grew colder, despite the fire raging nearby, as if whatever was hunting them carried its own chill. Then, from the darkness, something crawled into view, tall as a man, but moving on for jointed limbs. Its skin a glistening black that shimmered in the firelight. Its head was long and ridged, with eyes that glowed a faint, sickly green. Moved with unnatural grace, each step deliberate, silent except for the clicking of its jaws. The woman sucked in a sharp breath, pulling the child close and whispering one word in her own language. Mark didn't know it, but the tone was clear. Predator. The creature stopped in the center of the street, turning its head slowly toward them, and Mark realized with icy clarity that it could see them, even here in the dark. He fired the first shot. The first shot slammed into the creature's shoulder, sending a burst of black fluid spraying into the air. But instead of falling back, it jerked violently, as if the pain only made it faster. Mark's gut twisted. He had seen things run toward gunfire before, but never like this. It came at them in a blur, limbs bending in ways that defied nature, claws scraping the ground with a metallic screech. The woman didn't wait for orders. She turned and ran toward the base of the sky bridge, clutching the child so tightly its small cries were muffled against her armor. Mark fired again, each shot echoing through the ruined street, flashes of muzzle light cutting the dark, but the thing dodged with terrifying precision, twisting its body between rounds, closing the distance in heartbeats. The air was alive with the sound of claws on stone and the low, guttural growl that came from deep within its chest. Mark's breathing grew ragged, his wounds screaming with each step as he backed toward the bridge, trying to keep space between himself and the predator. The woman reached the base first, finding the rusted ladder that led to the elevated walkway. She began to climb one-handed, still holding the child with the other arm. Mark saw her struggle, her boots slipping on the metal, and for a split second he almost dropped his rifle to help, till the creature lunged at him. He dove to the side, rolling across the ground just as its claws ripped into the stoneware. He had been standing, sparks flying from the force. He came up on one knee and fired point-blank into its face. The bullet punched through one glowing eye, and the thing shrieked, the sound so sharp it rattled his teeth. It reared back, thrashing, but even half blind, it didn't stop. Instead, it swung one massive claw and caught him across the chest. The impact sent him crashing into the side of a burnt-out vehicle, knocking the air from his lungs. Pain exploded through his ribs, and he tasted blood. The woman was still climbing, glancing back down at him with an expression he couldn't read: fear. Anger, maybe both, but she didn't slow. Mark forced himself upright, his body screaming in protest, and fired again, aiming for the creature's remaining eye. The shot missed, grazing the side of its head, but it bought him half a second to sprint for the ladder. He grabbed the rungs and hauled himself upward, each pull of his arm sending sharp jolts through his wounded side. Below, the predator slammed into the ladder, making the whole structure shudder violently. Mark felt his grip slip but held on. Climbing faster, the metal groaning under both his weight and the thing's relentless blows. The woman had reached the top, and instead of running, she turned and leaned over, extending her free hand toward him. For the first time since they'd met, he saw something almost like urgency in her eyes. Not for herself, but for him. It grabbed her hand just as the predator leaped, its claws swiping up at his legs. She pulled with surprising strength, yanking him over the top rail, and they stumbled together onto the narrow bridge. The child whimpered in her arms, sensing the danger, its wide eyes darting between the two of them. There was no time to speak. The creature was already climbing. Mark turned, bracing his rifle against the railing, and aimed down at the ladder. The predator's claws scraped on the rungs as it pulled itself up, each movement fast and efficient despite its injury. Mark squeezed the trigger again and again, rounds sparking off the metal or tearing into the black hide. But it didn't. Slow. "Run," he barked, shoving the woman forward. They took off across the bridge, their boots clanging on the rusted metal, the whole structure swaying under their weight. The wind up here was sharp and bitter, carrying with it the acrid scent of smoke and melted steel. Below them, the city burned like a dying world, flames crawling over rooftops, buildings collapsing into glowing piles of debris. The bridge ahead was broken in places, sections collapsed into jagged gaps, but they had no choice but to leap over them. The woman's agility was unmatched. Even with the child in her arms, she cleared the gaps with ease. Mark, heavier in his armor, landed hard each time, his knees jolting, but he didn't stop. Behind them, the predator's screech split the night again, and the vibrations in the bridge told him it was gaining. They reached a section where part of the walkway had fallen away entirely, leaving nothing but a narrow beam connecting to the far side. The woman didn't hesitate. She stepped onto it, moving quickly, balancing like she'd done this her whole life. Mark followed, arms out slightly for balance. Every step careful but fast. The beam trembled under them, the wind pulling at his balance, but halfway across, the predator leapt onto it too. The impact nearly threw Mark off. He dropped to one knee, gripping the beam with one hand while swinging his rifle around with the other. The thing was charging down the beam, claws clicking, jaws open wide enough to split its head. Mark fired, the shot ringing out like a hammer strike in the narrow space, and the bullet slammed into the creature's throat. It stumbled, swaying dangerously, but recovered and kept coming. Mark's mind restat this range. He couldn't miss forever. But he also couldn't hold his ground without risking being knocked into the abyss below. The woman had made it to the far side and turned, watching her expression tight. She shouted something he couldn't understand and pointed behind him. Mark risked a glance back and saw that the far end of the beam was connected to a crumbling support frame. If he could just get past her and shoot it out, maybe the beam would collapse and take the predator with it. But that meant letting it get closer first. He gritted his teeth, stood and stepped backward, drawing it toward him. The predator lunged, claws flashing, and Mark dove past it, rolling across the beam and barely catching the far side railing. He came up, turned, and fired into the support frame. The metal gave with a shriek, snapping like brittle bone. Beam tilted violently, the predator scrambling for grip as it slid toward the gap. With one final screech, it fell, vanishing into the fire and rubble far below. Mark didn't wait to see it land, he just exhaled hard, the adrenaline still pumping in his veins, and leaned against the railing. The woman was staring at him, her breathing heavy. the child quiet now in her arms. For a long moment neither of them spoke, the only sound the wind and the distant roar of the fire. Then she stepped closer, studying him with those sharp alien eyes, and said in a low voice, "Why?" It wasn't a question about the fight. It was about why he stayed, why he risked himself when she had given him every reason to let her die. Mark didn't answer. He simply turned and started walking deeper into the bridge's shadowed path because whatever hunted them. He had the feeling that was only one of many, and the night was far from over. The bridge seemed endless as they moved forward, each step echoing hollow against the metal, the wind howling around them like a living thing. The fires below cast shifting orange light on their faces, making the woman's alien features look even sharper, more unearthly. Mark's chest ached from the hit he'd taken earlier. Each breath a reminder that his body was close to giving up, but his mind wouldn't let him stop. Somewhere ahead, beyond the broken skyline, the sound of distant machinery rumbled steady, mechanical, like the heartbeat of some giant. The woman kept glancing over her shoulder, her grip on the child tight, her posture tense as though expecting another attack at any second. Mark didn't blame her. That predator they'd sent falling into the flames hadn't been acting alone. Creatures like that were never alone. He had the sinking feeling more were nearby, maybe even ahead. They reached the far end of the bridge where it met a toppled building, the structure leaning at an impossible angle, its steel skeleton jutting into the night sky like broken ribs. A section of wall had been torn away, revealing a dark, yawning corridor inside. The woman stopped at the threshold, peering into the shadows, her ears twitching slightly, catching sounds Mark couldn't. "It's inside," she said finally, her voice low, almost unwilling. Mark wanted to ask what it was, but the way her eyes hardened told him he didn't want the answer just yet. Instead, he stepped past her into the corridor, raising his rifle. The air in here was thicker, carrying the stink of oil and something metallic, like dried blood. Each footstep crunched on shattered glass and debris, the sound unnervingly loud in the suffocating silence. The corridor angled upward, part of the building's warped structure, forcing them to climb through, tilting. Hallways lit only by the glow from outside. In one corner, a broken console still flickered weakly, cycling through alien text Mark didn't understand. The woman slowed as they passed it, her eyes darting to the screen, but she didn't stop. They moved deeper until the rumbling grew louder, joined by a faint rhythmic pounding that seemed to vibrate through the floor. It wasn't until they reached a wide chamber, once maybe a loading bay, that Mark realized the sound was coming from below. A massive hole had been torn into the floor, leading into darkness, and from that darkness came the pounding and the sound of chains. The woman stiffened, clutching the child closer, and Mark felt the tiny body tremble in her arms. Before he could ask anything, the floor around the hole shuddered. Something was climbing up. At first, all he saw were chains snaking upward, glinting in the dim light. Then the chains tightened, pulling something massive into view, something that wasn't just flesh or machine, but both. Its body was plated with dark armor fused into twisted muscle, each movement grinding metal against bone. 4 red eyes burned from its skull-like face, and a mouth lined with jagged metal teeth opened to release a hiss that chilled the air. It was a war construct, Mark realized, but not one built for the battlefield. It was built for hunting. Woman took a step back, her boot scraping against the floor, and that tiny sound made all 4 eyes snap to her. The thing moved impossibly fast for its size, lunging forward on clawed limbs, chains rattling like screams. Mark shoved the woman to the side, bringing his rifle up, but the first shot pinged harmlessly off its armor. He aimed for the joints, firing again, sparks flying where bullets struck exposed gaps. The creature didn't slow. It hit him like a truck, slamming him to the ground, its claws punching through the concrete beside his head. Just in time to feel one claw rip through the edge of his shoulder plate, tearing it loose. Pain flared through him, but he kept moving, scrambling to his feet. The woman had set the child down behind a fallen support beam and now stood with a long, curved blade in her hand, something she'd hidden in her armor. She moved with startling speed, slicing across the creature's flank. The blade cut deep, sending a spray of black and silver fluid into the air. But instead of retreating, the thing whipped its tail around, catching her in the side and hurling her against the wall. She hit hard, her breath knocked out, but she rolled to her feet. Again, teeth bared. Mark fired into its legs, forcing it to shift its weight, giving the woman another opening. Together, without speaking, they moved in a rhythm, his gun forcing it to turn, her blade striking when its armor shifted. But even as they fought, Mark could see more movement in the shadows of the hole. The war construct wasn't alone. A pair of red eyes appeared, then another. "We have to go," he shouted, firing into the hole to slow the climbing shapes. The woman hesitated, her gaze lingering on the first creature. Then she grabbed the child and darted toward the far side of the chamber where a narrow maintenance tunnel opened. Mark followed, covering their retreat, the sound of chains growing louder behind them. They slipped into the tunnel, the walls so close they had to move single file. The air here was damp, dripping with condensation, and the floor was slick under their boots. Behind them, the pounding of metal limbs drew closer. The tunnel twisted and dipped, leading them into a massive underground space that looked like the belly of a crashed ship. Strange machinery rose around them, humming faintly with dormant power. Alien symbols glowed faintly on the walls, casting the room in a ghostly blue light. The woman stopped near a large console, setting the child down carefully. Her fingers flew over the controls, entering commands in a language Mark didn't know, and one of the massive machines began to stir. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his eyes darting to the tunnel entrance where the first war construct appeared, chains dragging across the floor. "Ending this," she said without looking at him. The machine behind her came alive, its lights burning brighter, panels sliding open to reveal a massive energy core. The air vibrated with power, and Mark suddenly realized what she was doing. "You're going to blow this place," he said. She glanced at him then, her expression unreadable, but her eyes, they almost looked like regret. "If they get out," she said, "your world dies next." The war construct roared, charging, and Mark opened fire, emptying his magazine into its advancing bulk. The woman slammed her hand on the console, and alarms began to blare. The walls shook as the core built toward overload, its light growing blinding. She scooped the child into her arms again and ran for the far exit, shouting at him to move. Mark hesitated only a second before turning and sprinting after her, the heat from the overloading core burning against his back. Behind them, the war construct's roar was swallowed by a rising, deafening hum. They burst into the night air just as a blast of white light erupted from the building, a shockwave, throwing them to the ground. Mark lay there for a moment, ears ringing, the smell of scorched metal and ash filling his lungs. When he pushed himself up, the building was gone, replaced by a crater glowing faintly in the darkness. The woman stood a few feet away, holding the child close, her gaze fixed on the horizon. And there, far in the distance, more red lights were moving, dozens, maybe hundreds, like an approaching storm. Mark's stomach turned cold. The blast hadn't stopped them. It had only announced where they were. The ground was still trembling from the blast when Mark pushed himself to his feet. The night air sharp in his lungs, the smell of smoke curling into his senses like a warning. The crater behind them glowed faintly, bits of molten metal dripping into its depths, but the woman's eyes weren't on ITS, was staring into the distance, where the horizon pulsed with dozens of small red lights moving in perfect, eerie unison. Mark followed her gaze and felt his stomach drop. The war constructs hadn't just survived, they were coming, and now they knew exactly where to find them. The woman clutched the child tighter, her body angled away from the approaching swarm. Her muscles tense, as if every nerve in her was screaming to run. Mark's instincts matched hers, but his legs felt heavy, drained from the fight and the blast. Still, there was no choice. "Move," he rasped, and she didn't argue. They took off across the wasteland, boots pounding on the cracked ground. The air filled with a low building vibration that grew with each passing second. The red lights spread wider across the horizon, flanking like hunters circling prey. The terrain here was broken, and unpredictable jagged rock formations thrust up from the earth. Remnants of collapsed buildings lay in twisted heaps, and streams of molten rock cut across their path like glowing rivers. They moved through the shadows where they could. Staying low, the woman leading now, her alien senses somehow picking safer paths through the chaos. Behind them, the rumble became a roar, the ground shivering under the combined march of dozens, maybe hundreds of mechanical limbs. Then came the sound of air splitting, a sharp, high-pitched scream. Mark looked up just in time to see streaks of light cutting through the sky above them. Missiles. Down. He shouted, grabbing her shoulder, and dragging them behind a slab of collapsed concrete as explosions tore open the ground where they had been seconds earlier. Shards of rock and molten debris rained down, sizzling against the ground. They didn't wait to see if more were coming. They just ran again, lungs burning, legs screaming in protest. The swarm was closing in. Every time they found a narrow pass or canyon, shapes moved at the edges, dark and angular, darting forward with mechanical precision. The child was silent, but Mark could see the tiny hands gripping the woman's armor tightly, the little head buried against her chest. The sky above wasn't any safer. Shadows moved there too, flying constructs sweeping in long arcs, their glowing eyes scanning the ground. "They're hurting us," Mark realized aloud, and the woman gave him a quick glance that told him. She'd already known, but there was nowhere else to go. Time they tried to break the pattern, another attack cut them off, driving them back toward a single direction. Ahead, the land dipped into a broad valley filled with mist. But it looked quiet, almost too quiet compared to the chaos behind them. The woman slowed slightly, hesitating at the edge. "It's a trap," Mark said, his voice low, but she shook her head. "It's the only way." Then she jumped down, sliding down the loose gravel into the mist. Mark swore under his breath and followed, the cold vapor wrapping around him, dampening the smell of smoke and metal, but also blinding him to everything more than a few feet away. The ground here was soft and uneven, and every sound seemed muffled, like the world was holding its breath. They kept moving, the mist curling in strange, unnatural patterns around them, until Mark began to notice shapes in the fog tall. Thin spires of black metal jutting from the ground, humming faintly. The woman avoided them carefully, moving between them like she'd seen them before. Mark didn't ask. He just followed her lead. Then a voice spoke. Not from ahead or behind, but from everywhere at once, deep and resonant, vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. "You bring a human into the veil," it said, and though the words were in an alien language, Mark still understood them. In his head, the woman froze, her grip tightening on the child. "We need passage," she said, her voice steady but low. "The swarm comes." There was a long pause, and then the mist ahead shifted, revealing a massive shape, taller than any building, formed of shifting black metal that moved like liquid. Two glowing eyes, not red but pale silver, opened in the fog. "The swarm comes for you," the voice rumbled. "Why should the veil shield you?" Mark's hands tightened around his rifle. He could feel something in the air here, something that made his skin crawl as though the mist itself was alive. The woman stepped forward, holding the child out. "Slightly, because of her," she said simply. The massive figure leaned forward, its shifting metal features studying the child for a long, silent moment. Then it straightened again. "It's very well," it said, and the ground in front of them opened without warning. Mark's first thought was that it was a trap, but instead of falling, the opening revealed a long, spiraling ramp leading downward, lit by a soft blue glow. "Go," the voice commanded, "and pray your enemies do not follow." They descended quickly, the mist thinning as they went deeper until they emerged into a vast underground city. Carved into the stone like a labyrinth, towers of crystal, and metal rose from the floor, connected by bridges that gleamed with energy. It was beautiful, alien, and eerily silent. But the peace didn't last. As they reached the base of the ramp, alarms began to blare through the city, and shapes emerged from the shadows tall, armored figures with weapons Mark had never seen before. They moved with precision, surrounding them without hesitation. The woman raised her free hand in a gesture Mark didn't understand, speaking rapidly in their language. The guards hesitated, exchanging glances. Then one stepped forward. "If the swarm has found you," it said, "then it has found us all." Mark's heart sank at the truth in those words. Somewhere above, the muffled roar of the swarm echoed faintly through the stone. And then came another sound chains. The clanging of chains grew louder until the sound filled the underground hall, echoing off the crystal towers like a warning bell. Mark's eyes searched the shadows for the source, his rifle raised, every muscle tensed. The woman didn't move her grip on the child was still strong, but her shoulders were stiff, her head slightly bowed, as though she knew exactly what was coming. From the far end of the hall, a massive gate of black metal slowly opened, the screech of its hinges sharp enough to make Mark's teeth ache. Through the gap came figures, dozens of them taller than any human, their bodies plated in a strange matte armor that seemed to swallow the light. Each one carried a heavy chain in one hand, the other holding long, curved weapons that looked designed to tear through bone and steel alike. At the center of their formation was something worse, a towering construct of living metal, its surface rippling like liquid, its face split by a jagged, permanent grin. Silver eyes locked onto the woman, then shifted to Mark, and in that instant he felt as if his mind was being peeled apart layer by layer. "You should not be here, human," it said, its voice like iron grinding against stone. "This place was never meant for your kind." Mark gritted his teeth but didn't answer, because behind the threat he could hear something else, the distant rumble of the swarm above growing louder by the second. They hadn't been stopped, they were coming. The woman stepped forward, still holding the child, her voice calm but firm. "We need your gates open. If we stay here, all will die." The construct tilted its head, the jagged grin widening. "Then all will die," it replied simply. Something in Mark snapped. He stepped forward, putting himself between the woman and the construct. "You don't get it," he growled. "That swarm doesn't care about you, or us, or anyone. Burn your city to ash just because it's in the way. You want to hide down here? Fine. But you won't last a day if they find this place." The construct's silver eyes narrowed, but before it could speak, the child made a sound, a soft, hipshed hum, almost musical. The moment the sound left her lips, every armored guard froze. The hum grew louder, the notes strange and shifting, vibrating in Mark's chest. The crystal towers around them began to glow faintly, threads of light weaving between them like veins of energy. The construct stepped back, its grin faltering for the first time. "Impossible," it whispered. Mark looked down at the child, confused, but the woman's eyes were fixed on her daughter with something like fear and awe. "She's the last one," the woman murmured. "The last singer." Before Mark could ask, the hall shook, violently disrained from the ceiling, and the sound of explosions echoed from above. The swarm had breached the surface defenses. The guards broke formation instantly, shouting in their language, rushing. 2 defensive positions. The construct turned its gaze on the child again, its voice trembling in a way Mark hadn't thought possible. "If she sings, the city will awaken." The swarm will hear it, and they will not stop. The woman looked at Mark, and in that moment, he understood the choice: either stay hidden and die slowly, or call the swarm and fight with everything they had. "Do it," Mark said without hesitation. "We're not dying in the dark." The woman hesitated only a heartbeat, then nodded to the child. The little girl closed her eyes and sang. The sound was unlike anything Mark had ever heard, not just beautiful, but powerful, as though every note carried weight and light. The crystal towers blazed with color, beams of energy shooting upward through the stone above. The ground shook. Harder, but now it was from something below, machines waking, engines roaring to life, deep in the heart of the city. The walls peeled open to reveal massive war machines, their forms sleek and alien but bristling with weapons. The guards leapt into them, the machines moving like extensions of their bodies. For a moment, hope burned bright. Then the ceiling above split open. The swarm poured in like a black tide, hundreds of red eyes glowing in the dark. the war machines, surged forward, weapons lighting the air with fire and lightning. Mark fought beside them, his rifle a small but steady heartbeat in the chaos, his every shot meant to buy the woman and child more time. The construct fought too, its jagged grin turned toward the enemy, its liquid metal body ripping through swarm units with terrifying ease. But they kept coming. For every one that fell, 3 more crawled over its body. Mark was thrown to the ground, his armor cracked, blood hot against his side. Through the haze, he saw the child still singing, the light from the towers now so bright. It hurt to look at. The swarm began to falter, their movements jerky, as though the song was breaking something inside them. The construct caught Mark's gaze, silver eyes blazing. "Protect the singer," it commanded. And before he could reply, it threw itself into the thickest mass of swarm units, taking dozens with it in a single, shattering blast. Mark pushed himself up, his legs shaking, and fought his way to the woman and child. "Time to go," he shouted, grabbing her arm. She didn't argue. Together, they moved through the chaos, the war machines collapsing the tunnels behind them to slow the swarm. At the far edge of the city, they reached a platform where an alien shuttle waited, engines glowing. They climbed aboard the child, still humming softly, the song fading into a low, steady note. As the shuttle lifted off, Mark looked back through the open hatch. The underground city was ablaze with light and fire, the swarm tearing through it, but the defenders still fought. The woman followed his gaze, her voice quiet. "They'll die for her." Mark shook his head. "No, they'll die because of her. So we make sure it's worth it." Above them, the black sky was filled with more swarm ships. But now Mark wasn't running. He turned to the woman, his eyes cold. "We take this fight to them." And somewhere deep in the shuttle's systems, the child's song was still playing, carried on every channel into the void, where humanity's warships were already listening.